good morning for those who join us across the Atlantic. My name is Michal Baranowski. I'm a director of the German Marshall Fund office in Warsaw, and I have a tremendous pleasure to welcome Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Linas Linkevičius. Minister, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for joining us from your home, and we wish you all the best for of health, as we all need it in this situation. This is an event that we co-host with our colleagues in Washington, D.C. So in a second, I will pass on the mic, so to say, or the screen to our colleague in Washington, Jonathan Katz, and later on we'll be joined by President of GMF, Karen Donfried. But I just wanted to give everyone a quick bio of Minister Linkevičius, although he, of course, needs no introduction, but it's always nice to have one anyways. Minister Linkevičius has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2012. He also served as Lithuania's defense minister. He was an ambassador to NATO and also an ambassador to Belarus, which would be important for our conversation. And of course, right now, he's, I would say, the most prominent voice on Belarus, on democratic changes in Belarus. So, Minister, thank you for this. Also, for on behalf of everyone who cares about the Belarus and the democratic changes and people of Belarus. Minister, it's great to have you with us. Let me pass on the screen quickly to Jonathan in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. I also want to welcome everybody who's joined. Good morning, good afternoon. I think it's a great audience. Foreign Minister, I just want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Katz. I'm a senior fellow, and I direct democracy initiatives in Washington for GMF. And so it's really great to have you here. It's obviously a period where there's a lot of different movement and challenges in your region. COVID-19, of course, the challenges across your border in Belarus. There's a number of elections that have been had, some that are coming up. I don't know if anybody told you we're having an election here in the United States in a few days. But they're all tremendously impactful in terms of the issues that you and the Lithuanian government care about. And I also want to join my colleague in Warsaw and thanking you for your strong leadership on Belarus and standing with the Belarusian people at a very difficult time. But I know it's not the only challenge that you're focused on. And I think I want to just praise your efforts too to strengthen transatlantic unity and cooperation, bilateral cooperation between Lithuania and the United States, the role that you play both at NATO, but also in the EU. So I know we're going to touch on a number of topics. We're going to have an opportunity for the audience to weigh in questions, and please use the Q&A function. For everybody's familiar with Zoom, on the screen to pose questions, and I'll have a number of questions as well. But again, thank you, and I know this is an incredibly busy time for you as well. If I can, I'm going to send it back to Warsaw just to kick off with a few initial questions. And again, please feel free for those who are participating on both sides of the Atlantic to weigh in with questions, and we'll get to them looking ahead. Michal, over to you, back to Warsaw.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Minister, I wanted to start with a broad question because we obviously have authoritarian regime that is trying to hold the power in Belarus, but we also have ongoing war in Ukraine. We now have a new war in Nagorno-Karabakh. I wanted to ask you, sort of, as you sleep at night, what keeps you up? If something does keep you up, what is the security situation on alliances eastern flank from your perspective? What do you worry the most about, and what we should do about it? Minister, over to you.
Yeah, good evening, good afternoon, whatever. Good day to everyone, and indeed appreciate very nice, kind words. I definitely happy to be with you and discuss all these issues. Your question definitely very broad, but what wakes me up, usually wake up call. But I'm always saying that wake up call is not helping to wake up when leadership is needed, when we need to react. And what concerns me that I don't like when dictatorships are winning. I shouldn't say that this is the case now, but this is really too often happening when international community having in possession sufficient leverages of pressure, influence, sometimes retreating, sometimes starting to be complacent, sometimes, I don't know, do not recognizing threat which is emerging. And this is happening in the history, not for the first time. I can recall many examples. I can mention Munich agreement where Prime Minister Chamberlain came back from the talks and showed signature of Hitler and said, look, I brought you peace. And you see now peace will happen, so to say. And we know what happened after Sudeten was given to the Nazis and what kind of peace we all could expect. And let me mention other so to say event, United Nations story, history, and this slaughter in Srebrenica, genocide, with the presence of international community, with the presence of United Nations, with very limited mandate capability to act, and young boys and men were simply killed in the eyes of international community. Also lessons, are they learned? Coming back now to our region, behavior of Russia. Russia potentially could be very strong crisis manager, strong player in the economic field and security field, but rather instead of managing crisis, they're creating crisis everywhere basically, and through that they're trying to influence the situation again through this dictatorship, I would say. And that again, a lot of examples. 2008 war in South Caucasus, 20% of territory still occupied, and nothing changed even in rhetorics. At that time we made very strong statements and reacted, if somebody remembers, but nothing happened, and people retreated, basically said, let's be pragmatic and let's have business anyway, because we have to cooperate in economy and other fields. And that lesson was learned by aggressor, but not learned by the national community. And then annexation of Crimea happened in 2014. We have also frozen conflict in Transnistria. Now we have events in Belarus. And sometimes because of this lack of leadership, lack of gist of something what really could be called as a threat happening, and international community not reacting on time or reacting sometimes too late or too little. That really concerns me. And really what is happening now in Belarus is kind of political and moral, so to say, stalemate. And again, outgoing leader tries to save time, inventing some constitutional changes process, or trying to save time simply by imitating dialogue with the opposition in prison, which looks very weird and strange. And maybe he expects that as often, I shouldn't say as always, but as often, that will be taken as new normal, new reality. And the national community will say, yes, something wrong happened, but we have to live up with that and we have to continue. Maybe he counts on that. I hope he's not right. So this concerns me. I shouldn't say that it wakes me up, but definitely I don't like it, because a lot of structures, let me quote Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she's newcomer into politics. Those who know her story, she was accidental maybe. She never had ideas to participate in politics. But I remember once she said, well, look, when I started to take part in this political activity, I noticed how so many structures, so many organizations, regional, international, and such a little movement, little tangible deliverables. And really, she's so right. We're meeting sometimes so often in various formats and delivering a little when it's needed to do on time, as I said, and very properly. So maybe it's naive to expect that that would be so well efficiently developed, but nevertheless, we have to understand that definitely potential is big, potential force is also quite powerful, but sometimes not used because of lack of leadership when it is needed. And that's really quite disturbing.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to follow up on what you said, both about Russia and about Belarus. You said political and moral stalemate. You are obviously someone who, Lithuania and the Eastern flank is very impacted by what's going on. And of course, the people who are impacted the most are people of Belarus. If you could, you indicated a lack of sufficient leadership, but maybe we could go a little bit into more details. You are someone who watches what's going on in Belarus very closely, but not only watches, acts on and advocates on what the West, what Europe, what the US should do. So if you could give us your view of the current situation in Belarus, and also what should be done and how well are we doing in the current situation in order to help the democracy win in Belarus and for Democrats to really win in Belarus. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll try in short possible. Well, everybody knows, those who are following the situation, not necessarily very closely, but they know that regime is active in Lukashenko more than 20 years in his position. And the impression was that nothing will change. No traces for that, even no symptoms. And the society is kind of also agreeing with everything, and everybody forgetting this as a last island of stability in bad sense of that. But suddenly it happens, because it usually happens in the dictatorships when the threshold is already too low and people are not willing to wait more. And looks like that happened in Belarus, where this movement started decentralized, chaotic, very difficult to follow where is the center. And this is good side of that people definitely organizing it by themselves, but also bad because they are not organized. And this is also obvious. But there are many people. And this reaction was maybe unexpected by authorities, because these crises or protests taking place regularly from time to time, but just a handful of people were protesting. They put into the custody, usually arrested, and that ended up somehow very, very simple way. We also traditionally issued some sanctions, as it was after 2010, but the list was longer, much longer than we have now, 133 persons, including President Lukashenko at that time. So it was not a problem to have him on the list since the very beginning. That's it. So there were some positions that we should really isolate the country totally, and some others thinking that we have to engage anyway and try to look for some possible incentives to continue with the reforms. Therefore, sanctions were called off after they released political prisoners, and was also big discussions whether to do that or not, because nothing changed. But we were, and among them, I was as well, saying that let's fix this. Let's take it, because we demanded release political prisoners. They did. So we have to also meet this kind of move by other actions from our side to keep motivation and incentives to continue with the reforms. Was that in vain or not? Difficult to say, but we tried to do really the best in order to find any moment, any leverage to continue with the cooperation. And that was the situation. But unexpectedly, after this last elections, we expected something can happen again. So we helped opposition people, and even kind of beforehand tried to discuss with them possible refuge, if necessary, issued national visas to many of them, including Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, by the way, even in July, because we expected that something can happen. And that was the case, exactly. So this brutality was unbelievable, but protests of people were also unbelievable. They never ever in the history, sometimes 400,000 protesters in the streets, extremely peaceful, I would say. And even if you have seen the photos when before stepping on the bench, they taking off shoes, they were photos. So that's really, it was no need whatsoever to send riot police against them, sound grenades or tear gas or whatever. That was really not necessary. and the regime was confused what to do. So the best thing to accuse somebody from outside. And they started to accuse NATO, for instance, which was not the case. You shouldn't be very gifted intelligence service man to recognize that nothing happens on the borders and nobody tries to challenge regime from outside, but nevertheless it was used very intensively. It's still used in the rhetoric of outgoing leadership and also by their sponsors in Russia. So the calls for military assistance from Russia were also very interesting, following previous rhetoric of the former leader, when he said how he's finding life very difficult because Russia undergoing pressure from Russia because of this implementation of two-state union agreement, and he really feels not good. So he needs some even backup and support against Russia. But after that happened, he immediately called for military assistance for the country, which he seemed to kind of called before as not very friendly. So he demasked all his rhetoric, and it was understood that everything he takes care, this is his position, at the expense of anything, at the expense of interests of his people, of the sovereignty of the country, of integrity of the country. That was not so important. The most important was to survive, and that was obvious. But nevertheless, tactics remained, and very much dependent was on Russia's attitude, because it was the only country with whom they started their talking. They rejected all calls of mediation or kind of facilitation of dialogue from outside, from European Union, from European capitals. Leaders were calling, trying to reach Lukashenko. Nobody was successful. And they were talking just to Kremlin. And Kremlin also hesitated at the beginning, if we remember, what to do. Maybe they calculated what kind of options, and all options, in my assessment, were bad for them. But they decided to choose this one to support this outgoing leadership, because otherwise, probably they calculated that would be indication of weakness, and maybe that would be some also message back home, because stationed back home also not very stable. We see that reactions and movement of public movement taking place, and not just in St. Petersburg or Moscow, but also in Far East, in Buryatia, other places. So it's not good to leave initiative to the street, as they say. They don't like it, and these public leaders is also not very comfortable. So they decided this option, which is, in my understanding, also very counterproductive by all means. It leads nowhere, just to the stalemate situation further. Tension not disappearing. If somebody calculates that people will be tired or scared, or winter is coming, so maybe less people on the street, as we can see, it's not the case. People also felt humiliated and insulted by the authorities when they were called drunkards, losers, and God knows whom. But too many, 400,000 women with the flowers on the streets, very difficult to mix them with somebody like they were called by the authorities. So this maybe went too far. And I would say even one more argument, what would be good to listen in Moscow, that could be damage for future relations between nations, because the Belarusians, they are not against Russia per se. They are really not against. They feel the same roots, cultural roots, relations, and they're not anti-Russian. Same as these new faces of opposition we've never seen before. They were not making statements against Russia, against Kremlin. So this is also an important factor, and it should be neglected. So role of Russia, very important. And now I'm coming to the point briefly, what we can do. First of all, we must stay united, but not just united, but also very kind of tough in messaging, saying that this leadership definitely is outgoing. It was said, but not immediately. And that was not clearly said, because they still believe and expect, I think that they expect that they will survive. They will stay, and one day it will be said by international community that we don't like it, but looks, it's reality, so we have to continue dialogue, as it's usually said, and they may be counting to save time and preserve this new reality. So very strong message to those guys that they have to organize new transparent elections with the presence of international observers. This is the only way out of the situation, to let Belarusians elect own leaders, Assumingly, I would say these leaders will not be anti-Russian, but definitely they will be new, and that's something they're demanding. I believe it's not too much. Also, we have to help victims of repressions, those physical, economic victims, and that's not so easy to do. So we shouldn't pay money or supply resources to the regime for whatever reason. It's also not so easy to give resources or the support directly to the non-governmental organizations, civil society, free media. It's also not easy to do so, but we should be flexible and creative to look for some funds. But we have to do that as we speak now. So this is short strategy, but long strategy would be to provide vision for the people. When we're talking to the opposition, and they all of them, they would like to see this vision. What will happen after democratic changes will take place? What is the future for this country? Visa-free regime, integration to single market of Europe, and something else. And people should feel the perspective, because so far they didn't have it at all. So this is very important. Also, strong message to Moscow, not to test. They usually accusing others what they're doing themselves. So this is also quite a known habit. And now they're accusing everyone, in particular Lithuania, Poland, for instance, for intervening into domestic affairs. Although we all know what kind of influence from Moscow coming. And temptation now to take remainings of sovereignty and independence very high. I expect that will happen, because leadership is so vulnerable and compromised totally. And nominally, Belarus will stay as independent country, but de facto, everything will be taken. And we will have this enlarged Russia de facto on our borders. I'm sitting here 30 kilometers to the border, so it's really very close. And this is also reality. So we have to say clearly that they shouldn't use it to abuse that country. They shouldn't use the situation to take this weakness, because the people of Belarus, although they are not anti-Russian, but they would like to be independent. They would like to be sovereign. And this is also their desire, and that should be respected. At least that should be heard. So everything is moving, but very slowly, more than 2 months after elections. So we managed to have to agree on some list of sanctions, which is really not too big, even not compatible to the size of it was previously. Although now the actions of authorities were extremely, by far, stronger and more brutal than before. So we didn't do that. It took time to agree that Lukashenko should be on the list. It was also not immediately happened. We're still discussing how to support civil society. And it takes too long, it takes too long. I believe we should be stronger. So we should be stronger collectively and also nationally. And I appreciate very much what happens not only from European Union capitals, but also from UK, also from DC. I was in Washington and met officials and understood that despite elections, there are also other issues that are concerning our friends. And they are talking about that. And that's very important that sanctions were also introduced. So sanctions is something which is minimum we can do, We cannot solve the situation by sanctions. We even should talk about the need for international investigation, because it was not just violation of human rights, which has no borders, as we all know, it's universal, but probably allegedly crimes were committed and they must be investigated. And those who did that, and we're still receiving accounts, if a small part of these accounts is true, it's already too much. It cannot happen in Europe in 21st century, but it's happening as we speak. And now, by the way, last point, today's statement, Lukashenko said that he is concerned that the protesters crossed the line and there are a lot of symptoms of terrorism. I'm afraid brutality can come back again, because if something's not happening according to your wishes, military threat or some kind of provocations or terrorism, it's very easily, it could be imitated, and we know that from the past, from the legacy. So these developments are still concerning, and we still can do more than we are doing, but it's not first time happening. We could do more in previous occasions during these frozen or active conflicts I just mentioned briefly. And we are not doing now, so unfortunately this is reality. So we are capable, but sometimes willing, but sometimes maybe not capable to do on time and sufficiently.
Thank you very much, Minister, for a strong message on Belarus, and also for I would like to say, sort of impatience on your part, which keeps us all driving forward a little bit faster and a little bit further. United and tough, and also your message about the need for perspective, for vision for the people of Belarus. Let me now switch to our colleague in Washington for either broader perspective or follow up, because you also mentioned, of course, that this is not only European challenge and an opportunity, but it's also an opportunity for our colleagues from Washington D.C. who are just ahead of important election. So, Jonathan, over to you, and to everyone online. I see already we have a number of questions. Keep them coming to the Q&A section of the seminar, and we'll get to them in due manner. Jonathan, over to you.
Great. And I also just want to welcome Karen Donfried, GMF's president, and who I know is going to join us at some point in this conversation. I also want to just, thank you for sort of raising the concerns about sort of what's taking place, about the potential for another round of violent crackdown. I think there's been over, 16,000 people detained already in Belarus. And I think that what you said about the need for increased levels of support for civil society, for NGOs, thinking both the immediate and then also in the medium to longer term is really important, as well as pushing back against any type of external interference from Moscow in what's taking place that's unhelpful to seeking a peaceful transition, which is what the population wants. I did want to sort of go back to, and I think this is how I can expand the conversation. You started off, there was a question about sort of what keeps you awake. And you started off by saying that you worry, or that you see, it's disturbing to you to see autocrats somehow having an upper hand against what I think are sort of the proponents of democracy, of cooperation, that these malign actors in some respects are gaining an upper hand. And I think one of the reasons why we wanted to have you here today is because I think many people consider you to be one of the most responsible pro-democratic voices in Europe right now that is trying to address these challenges. And we're here in the United States. We have an election coming up in a couple of days, and I wanted to get your thoughts about what you would like to see from a next administration, whether it's Trump 2 or a Biden administration. What would you want to see the U.S. prioritize, both regionally, but also in terms of transatlantic relations? Because there's a number of significant challenges, and I'm hoping that we can bring, that when Karen Donfried joins us also later on, because she has co-led a task force that I think, I'm just going to pull it up, that with others on the European side too, trying to look at some of these key issues. And since you've been so focused on, and I think Lithuania has as well, at maintaining core transatlantic relations, you have an intrinsic need to, because of security needs, but also because regional instability, but because I think, based on sort of where Lithuania came from to where it is today, that the value of transatlantic relations is an interest. It's a real intrinsic interest of Lithuania, but should be of all transatlantic partners. So if I could just bring you in to ask you that, because I think, we have seen a disintegration, but what would you like to see going forward from the United States, looking ahead as we have political changes occurring here? So over to you, Mr. Foreign Minister.
Thank you. No, indeed, the world is undergoing a lot of stress tests. It's because of values, because of fight between values and interests. And sometimes, unfortunately, interests taking over at the expense of values, which really looks not very, very nice and not very good. We're sometimes losing platform on which we are building our unions, our organizations, and that shouldn't be the case. So we always looking quite carefully, attentively into the political events and, needless to say, elections. If we can say that, every country electing own leadership and own presidents, but United States electing president also for the world, because it's world power. Everybody interested in that, what will be the position, what will be the role. I'm very strong, it's not a big secret, and same as many of you, all of you, strong Atlanticists, so to say, transatlanticists, and I'm a believer. I'm a believer in this, and I believe this is very important, not only because of security, defense, it's also important for what other means are concerned, and which are now pushed a bit aside, like foreign trade, for instance, or especially climate and other regional aspects, multilateralism challenged. So I would like to see stronger ties, because transatlantic ties is irreplaceable value. If somebody would like to challenge world peace order, they have to undermine transatlantic links and like to split us, to divide, which is from time to time happening. So we shouldn't help them, and we shouldn't help them from both sides of the Atlantic, basically. Not just one side is not responsible; both sides are responsible, and that's very important to understand. I'd like to see more presence of America in Europe, with all means, interests, also deployment, if you wish. So we registering recently much more attention from United States to our region, because troops are deployed for the exercises. It's not called permanent, by the way, because this title is very sensitive to some, but de facto it is permanent. And last fall and this year again, some substantial deployment of US troops with the armed vehicles, with the tanks for the exercises. It's a little bit demonstration of solidarity, but also very tangible and visible reassurance measure to our region, because we all know that we have a lot of gaps of capabilities, and the best deterrence, or A2AD, to use this NATO terminology, is presence. So here we see really very big attention. I would wish this to continue. But not only with regard to Baltic region, I would like to see that with regard to all Europe, because in previous administration there were some comments that not sufficient attention to Europe, and later there were some suspicions. So I hope it will not be the case. It should be understood on both sides, and have no doubt there is potential for understanding. Have many friends in both, so to say, families, Democrats, Republicans, and I know that this transatlantic feeling is very strong. So I expect this to be continued, because this is for the sake of, again, both sides of the ocean. It's not at the expense. So that's the minimum I'd like to wish, and I expect that will happen, because this has to happen. I see no reasons to change some strategy, whatever outcome of the elections will be. Maybe there could be some peculiarities, some nuances, but general trend should be saved and preserved. And that's also depends on us, on Europeans, not to launch questionable initiatives, not to raise suspicion, rather to build bridges. I can provide examples. For instance, we have really very important and challenging and ambitious military cooperation in the European Union called PESCO. And Lithuania have chosen also niche capability cyber reaction teams, rapid reaction teams, to come to help nations before crisis, during crisis, aftermaths of the crisis. Nobody questioning the importance of cyber defense these days, and the threats could raise. But I would add, this is regardless in which organization you're addressing this, be it NATO, European Union, the same pool of forces should be engaged. And for us, for the small country in particular, but for big as well, important not to waste resources, not to duplicate. So we have to cooperate, but we cannot convince our colleagues to invite third countries for PESCO cooperation, in particular United States, which I believe it's counterproductive. So this is example where we are sometimes creating artificial obstacles and raising suspicion, and which shouldn't be the case in the future. So task to make us stronger, it's lays on both sides, and we have to do our best. Also, defense spending's very right remarks, maybe wording sometimes hard, maybe for some insulting, but this is true. We should share responsibility, and this club of 2% country is not terribly big, as we know, by the way, despite of commitments which are written, agreed, and it's not yet happening. So this is a European kind of problem, and we have to take it very seriously. Many issues should be taken, but I'm convinced we can take them only together, not splitting each other, not dividing, because otherwise will be big damage to the world, not only in security terms, but in all other means. And that depends on the strong leadership, and first of all, of the leadership on the United States, one of the strongest players in the world. And I expect that would be the case.
Can I just a quick follow-up too? I started by asking a question, I think on the military side and security, that's clearly what you outlined is the need of cooperation. And I guess the question I have is on the issue of democracy, and of values, of what, and I think this is, sort of maybe a core part of erosion, maybe of trust within the alliance and amongst alliance members, concerns about issues of, obviously the challengers don't share the same concerns about democracy. Whether we talk about Belarus, or we talk about one of the ways that you sort of dig a divide in the transatlantic relationship is by weakening democracy and democracy. So how do you envision strengthening democracy? You talked about some of the things you could do in terms of support for those in Belarus, but how does the transatlantic community bolster its values, the values that stand at the core of the relationship? There's certainly security, but there's something that seems to be something that autocrats and others seem to have discovered is an Achilles heel, even within the alliance, is a weakness or a penchant for pulling away. And Lithuania is sort of a leading example of democracy. You often talk about this, but how do you strengthen that core? Because if that core is weakened, the alliance is only as strong as its weakest link. And so I just wanted to pose that question to you, because that seems to be a core issue when we talk about autocrats versus democracies, or transatlantic alliance versus global competitors.
We should spare no time to discuss these issues, not to hide behind the bush or behind the problems, not to pretend they are not existing, but just to spend time to discuss. And sometimes lack of direct engagement creates this misunderstanding or these divisions or this crisis of understanding of values. And this is exactly the case. Are we talking between European Union or United States? Are we talking on Turkish issue, Turkish-Greek conflict, both members of NATO, by the way? Are we talking about Middle East? We shouldn't shy away from this kind of misunderstanding and the differences. No, let's say JCPOA, right, with Iran. There are also approach from the United States, especially from Israel, that is really detrimental and gets faster for Iran to get nuclear weapons. And there are understanding in the European Union that this is better than nothing. And if you have nothing, so it's even no possibility to control at all. So there are two contradicting points of views. They should be addressed in joint, open, candid meeting, not by statements in the press, but to put arguments on the table. And by the way, Lithuania, you asked about our position, and me personally, I was always of the opinion that we have to raise these issues candidly, openly with the colleagues, put arguments on the table, why they think that JCPOA is detrimental. Also, we should, what was our permanent call to talk about issues not only which are included in the agreement, but also missile defense programs, also allegedly relations with the terrorist groups, which are not included, and that's exactly the case. The same engagement with Israel. You probably know that we were among those who initiated, after more than 20 years maybe, visit of Prime Minister of Israel to European Union for direct talks. For informal lunch. It didn't happen for decades. It's not normal. Basically, if we need to have some kind of relationship, now it's becoming really more open, but that was not easy to do. So we also tried to facilitate. We were among those who said that, yes, many things we don't like what Turkish colleagues and allies are doing, not only Syria, Libya, but also what's going on now in Karabakh. It's not clear. sufficiently. But we have to talk directly, also to listen to the concerns. And after this attempts of the coup, I was first minister of maybe European Union, visited Ankara. It happened because nobody visited, nobody talked to them. And I offered my condolences to those victims, civilian victims on the streets of Ankara. And I was appeared to be first who did that, which is obvious thing probably. And for them, it was very important to conduct a decent dialogue. And maybe we can disagree on many things, but we have to be engaged in the discussion. So what could be done in order to solve, or at least to mitigate this crisis of democracy, as you said, or mutual understanding? We really should talk more with each other, to engage more in the existing formats. And this is the only way to go, because interests are different. Challenges are not diminishing, they are even increasing. In addition, this pandemics, which also spoils all our life. So we really cannot feel this comfort to wait until better time is coming. We have to take lead now. And this is just a short recipe.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that dialogue is critical. And that's, you see that even within the EU, this conversation happening among member states, among NATO member states. But it seems to be a challenge that we have to address. I know we have a number of questions. I'm going to send it over to Warsaw just to start those questions. And I think we have over a dozen right now, and hopefully we'll get to all of them if we can. Over to Warsaw.
Thank you, Jonathan, for setting me up for absolutely impossible task of going through 12 questions. So Minister, I'm gonna cheat badly, and I apologize for all the great questions. But there were a number of questions addressing EU's and Western relationship with Russia. So I would like to, take our limited time to focus on that. And there is one question that happens to be the last one. Maybe it's from Stefano Stefanini. So also a great person you probably know very well. So it's a longer, very good question. But the bottom line that Stefano Stefanini is asking is it possible to make Belarus a democracy-only issue instead of then a greater geopolitical one? Or is it too late for that? And earlier, he's also referring to the question of how do we deal with Russia in all this, both in the context of Belarus, how the Belarusian democratic opposition would like us as the West to deal with Russia. And obviously, there are a variety of views on this within Europe, and Lithuania has been recently visited by President Macron, who has very much his views on this issue. So perhaps you could refer to that. And let's turn to this if we are able to catch some other ones. But there is a lot of focus on Western relationship with Russia. So over to you, Minister.
Thank you, and also good to hear from Stefano. Stefano, I cannot see you, but I appreciate you are with us, recalling all these good days in the past. And he's quite smart to put such a smart question, which is impossible to answer in length, but in short, I even don't know how to start. On Belarus, first of all, everything should be consistently. Let's not be naive. It will not be forepost of democracy immediately. The least could be done, and definitely what is demanded by the people, to have this free, fair elections, which is really not too much. They are not seizing power, by the way. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she is not calling herself president. Also, she was insisted to call like that. She said, no, I'm not president. Also, although she got enormous backup by the people, she wants to facilitate democratic process, which will lead to the elections, and they would elect own leaders. What I assume, they will not be anti-Russian. They're also making some statements, which they're doing that on their own, by the way, nobody consulting them. It's not geopolitical, they say. It's not anti-Russian, not pro-Russian, not anti-European Union, not pro-European Union. Okay, time will come. But for now, they would like to have more or less democratically elected leadership, which is, I believe, important to the way further to develop the process in that country. And this is European country, and they are very nice people, by the way. They really deserve to live better. And that's the minimum could be done now. On Russia, it's another story. You know, unfortunately, I'm very dissatisfied that I already mentioned that Russia, instead of creating or managing crisis, they're creating the crisis, and that's the way to go. This military foreign policy is still taking place, testing and verifying how far they can go. If they can annex 20% of Georgian territory and with the agreeable price, so why not to repeat? Now they annexed Crimea. And again, if nothing will happen, why not to repeat somewhere else? So this is something we should take very seriously. That means we should have very tough, clear messages. If our messages will not be tough and clear from position of strength, by the way, it's not, politesse will not make any impression. So they will continue. It will be taken as a weakness simply. And that's the case. They also always looking for some special case and some exceptions, caveats in the treatment, saying that this is a special situation in Russia, this is a special democracy. No, there are rules. There are rules in the world. This is international law, and they must comply to the rules. And if we will not insist, there will be another problem and disaster somewhere else. And we should blame no one, just ourselves, because we are not consistent, not them. Why they should respect our decisions if we are not consistent ourselves in respecting our own decisions? So that's the case. And we're inventing some stories about reorganizing European security architecture just because somebody doesn't like. This is not good. If we're talking about some kind of strategic autonomy, I don't like this term because it smells like, again, division and isolation. I can understand strategic autonomy in economy, in industry. After pandemics, it's opened wounds, lack of industry potential in producing this protection gears, medicine. Some could be purchased just in China, which is really very bad and difficult situation. So I can understand this, but in security, in defense, strategic autonomy, it's not good. But these initiatives are pumping up from time to time, and I believe that this is shouldn't be the case. So coming back towards Russia, we already in European Union developed some 5 priority points of the relations, which is also not terribly unexpected. This is engagement, selective engagement, the sanctions also, but also there are mentioned relations with civil society, which is in my understanding not used properly or not regularly, to say the least. And if leaders of the world coming to queuing to come to Kremlin, if not accepted in Kremlin, going to Sochi, then having this family photo and nothing happens. So we're always saying that channels of communications are important, but to create impression of business as usual, that would be also counterproductive, because that would create impression of really business as usual, although in the reality nothing happens. And this dialogue serves as a small screen to do nothing or to do something worse. So this is the lesson. Also, I would suggest to rethink our understanding of provocation, of term provocation, because many calling not to be provocative. Maybe Stefano remembers when we in NATO discussed need of Article 5 exercises, and there were voices, let's not do that because it could be provocative. Now it's not the case. Everybody understands that we have to train what we signed for, by the way, and this is nothing to do with any provocation, but this is always the understanding that let's not be provocative. Let's not name names, or let's not state very sharply something what deserves to be stated because it could be provocative. I would suggest to think otherwise. Sometimes provocative if you're not doing something when you need to do. It's provocative if you're not stating what you have to state. If you're just going by, this is provocative. And especially with regard to Russia, unfortunately, because this country still applies philosophy of zero sum. They cannot still understand that if in the vicinity of the country, some countries will choose the way not necessarily along the thinking of that country, that would be counterproductive and detrimental to them. They cannot understand that stability is also the asset. And if these countries will choose another way, doesn't mean that will be anti-Russian way. And this takes time to reach it, and sometimes it's not happening. So what we have to do, coming back to this point of relations with civil society, we also, while talking to the government, it's obligatory to talk to opposition, to civil society. And what we are doing in Lithuania, we're organizing Russian forums. It's 6 already happened before. We meeting every year. This year was not possible due to pandemic, but I have no doubt it will be continued. So inviting Russian intelligentsia, journalists, freedom fighters, opposition, politologists, we're speaking in Russian about future of Russia in future of democratic Russia in Europe, which cannot be perceived as anti-Russian. So I'm always saying that when blamed being anti-Russian, that I cannot be anti-Russian because I speak Russian. I like Russian culture, literature, poetry. I have many friends. Maybe there are not so many in Kremlin, but Kremlin is not just all Russia. Russia is bigger, and let's remember. So this is not happening, as I said, and it's not good. So let's be stronger, let's be more united, but also let's be principled, not retreat and not give up when question is about respect to the rule of law, respect to international law. Cannot be any caveats, cannot be different architecture if somebody doesn't like. No, architecture should be definitely which was tested and already verified as a useful and efficient. So we have not so much time to talk more, but that would be in short my suggestion how the West should conduct relations with Russia.
Thank you very much, Minister. This is great for the short period of time that we have for the conversation. I want to jump on the other side of the Atlantic to be fair to our colleagues there before we for Jonathan, if you want to jump in, and,
sure.
And then we also want to make sure that we have time for exchange with President Donfried.
Absolutely. And the Foreign Minister, I just want to thank you. I think this issue of engaging Russians is really important, of the transatlantic strategy, and unity, I think, is really important as well. And it needs a much longer conversation, but it's really an important one. I have a question from a former colleague of mine, Vince Morelli, who was with the House International Relations Committee, now the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He asks, Lithuania does not seem to share the same level of pessimism regarding the state of transatlantic relationship as some of its other European partners. Regardless of who is the president of the US come January, are there 2 or 3 actions that you believe Washington and Brussels could engage in early 2021 to reinforce and reinvigorate the transatlantic partnership? And I think this will connect directly to Karen's participation as well, Karen Donfried. So if you could respond to Vince's really good question.
Nothing unexpected could be invented here. What I would expect that to reconfirming these principles, which links us both sides of Atlantics, and also in the frame of article of NATO agreement, first of all. So European Union must reconfirm commitment for 2% and commitments for the defense. As I said, to delete all these gray spots of suspicion what we have, and I will not repeat what I mentioned before. We have to do that. US, I would expect to recommit their interest in Europe, and will find in Europe ally, not competitor or enemy, which sometimes smells, which is, I believe, not very productive. We have to reconfirm our commitments to each other, and that's simplest way to do. Again, if there are some misunderstandings, they should be addressed in the forums which are candid and open, not shying away from the problems which are still existing. It depends on the new administration policy. Maybe there will be some different list of these problems, but they will remain, I believe. So they should be taken immediately. And nobody should doubt, I believe it's very important, nobody should doubt outside that we will be split, that we will be divided. This is a living organism. It's possible to have some misunderstandings, but it's impossible to have divisions. And somebody expects that NATO will be dissolved, or NATO will be kind of challenged and weakened. Nobody should expect that. That should be very strong signal to outside world and those opponents, be it terrorists, be it, I don't know, these regimes which are called dictatorships. They all should understand, and that's our task to do immediately after this new political cycle will start. So that's maybe too much to desire, but I believe this is doable, possible if we all understand the importance of that.
Great. I think Karen Donfried was going to respond. Karen, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. And Mr. Minister, what an absolute delight to see you. It is a privilege to host you on GMF's virtual stage. And I want to thank you for your leadership. I heard everything you said and your kickoff about the lack of leadership that we've seen in the international community when there are burning issues for us to address leads me to want to give a shout out to the role that Lithuania is playing, and not only on Belarus. So it was really fantastic to hear your thoughts, not only about the urgent situation in Belarus and the need for stronger collective and national action in light of that, but I'm also so grateful for your commitment to transatlantic partnership. And Jonathan was kind to mention the transatlantic task force that GMF and the Bundeskanzler Helmut Schmidt Stiftung organized. And I co-chaired that task force with Wolfgang Ischinger. And we laid out a series of about 36 concrete policy recommendations for 2021 for a new US administration together with its European partners. And I'm going to push a little bit harder on Vince's question, because I'd really like to get your thoughts on, let's imagine for a minute that there is an early NATO summit in March of next year, which some are talking about, particularly if there were a Biden victory. But regardless of who's US president, if you were to have an early NATO summit beyond the US reaffirming its support for the alliance and for Article 5, and for European allies making clear what they're bringing to the table and recommitting on the defense spending front, are there concrete initiatives, or is there one concrete initiative that you think it would be important for NATO to undertake to make clear the relevance of transatlantic partnership to citizens on both sides of the Atlantic? And of course, the spectrum of options extends from the pandemic to China. But from where you sit, what's the most important thing for NATO to do in 2021? Thank you.
I hope a little number of people would question need for NATO to exist anymore. Even though skeptics now will understand that this is needed, so we have to prove it. As we said some time ago, that NATO out of region, out of sight, so now it's coming back, showing the reinforcement and strengthening of security of the regions which need so, including my region, Baltic region. So the least I would like to see this continuity of the strong transatlantic policy, commitment to Article 5, commitment to 2%, not only, but with output efficiency, because 2% is not enough. We have to address gaps of capabilities, not to waste resources for duplication. We really have to recommit this cohesion between European Union and NATO, this cooperation in terms of very concrete projects like battle groups and NRF, for instance, logistics support, especially I would mention hybrid threats. We have to address them together, be it cyber, be it strategic communications, be it energy security, and this is also the case. So we have to tell very clearly that we are ready to cooperate very closely in these issues. Well, when it comes to the crisis, sometimes we know that alliance not taking part in the managing of some crises. But we also know that NRF was used in Pakistan and not for the purpose which was designed, but nevertheless, no one else could jump in with the assistance when it was needed. So alliance should be ready to address threats which are also important for the world, also to rethink strategy to fight terrorism, for instance, what we can do in order to train personnel, in order to also prepare ourselves for the challenges which are still emerging everywhere in the world. And again, coming back to this political agenda, we shouldn't shy away from the differences of perception we have, and not to revisit what was proved to be right, especially principled positions, our relations with Russia and attention and our attitude, because there are some maybe doubts sometimes that will continue, but I hope shouldn't be any doubts, and that should be reconfirmed. A lot of very simple things. And this reflection group, which is also now engaged besides initiatives you mentioned, this also aimed to look at that again, what NATO should do in order to not to reset, but kind of refresh our contacts, communication, to make it more confidence in these relations. And I believe they will come with some deliverables, not revisiting key, so to say, aspects of our organization, which is also very important to note. So the key word will be continuity, and deleting all doubts about hesitance to do that, and all readiness to stay united, and readiness to take all challenges which are going to split us or challenge. And that would be a very important message, be it in March or some other month. That's important to know. But anyway, this new political cycle or season should start with the really strong message of our unity and readiness together.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's now my responsibility, honor, and a bit of a tough role to bring our conversation to a close. I wanted to thank you for really tour de force of a conversation from Belarus to health of the West to NATO and to future of our relations with Russia. It's been fantastic to have you with us. I also wanted to thank Dr. Karen Donfried, Jonathan Katz, and also we have a colleague, Lithuanian colleague in our GMF Warsaw office who put this together, Monika Bikauskaite. So we have one of, you can see that, you know, we are really focused also on your country in a special way. And Minister, thank you for your leadership. I mean, this has been, you know, this is great to hear from you, but it's really your leadership over the last months, especially, but of course, over the last 8 years has been tremendous. So please stay with us. We look forward to having you at future seminars and hopefully eventually in person as well. And for those, for everyone who joined us, thanks for joining us. Stay healthy, stay safe, and fingers crossed for next week. For whatever side you are rooting, I hope that what Minister said about us staying strong and united in a face of increasingly challenging world will be the product of the decision, unfortunately, of only American people. I also agree with you, Minister, that we should all get to vote. Anyways, thanks again. Thanks from Warsaw. Thanks from Vilnius. Thanks from Washington, D.C. And see you again soon. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks.